Today I'm going to show you just how incredibly easy it is to write a keylogger in Python. Just a note, this is not going to turn you into a hacker, as most keyloggers is probably going to be written in something like C, because Python, it needs an interpreter and it also has dependencies. So let's jump straight in. So to begin, I've just opened VSCode in my Kali Linux machine, but this can be run on anything that has Python installed. So also a note is this is going to require the installment of pynput, but I'll show that after this. So first we're going to do is just create a new file, and we'll just call this basic keylogger.py because it's a Python file. And then what we're going to do is we're going to import the listener from the pynput module so it can listen for key presses. And what we're going to do is from pynput, which is the library, we're going to pynput.keyboard, we're going to import listener. So this is going to, like I said, this is going to import that listener from the pynput module so we can work with it. And what we're going to do now is we're going to define a function called log keystroke, which is going to run every time a key is pressed. So we define the function, and then what we want to do is we want to create a new file to save all these keystrokes in. And the way we do that is with open, and we'll just call it keylogger.txt, and we want to append to it. So you can write to it, you can read to it, or you can read it, or you can append. And if we append to it, it means we're not going to overwrite anything, and if the file doesn't exist, we're going to create the file. So then what we want to do is we want to do, because we called it f, we want to do f.write, and then we're going to just put in the format string, and we're going to pass in that key, and we want a new line every time a key is saved. So every time a key is pressed, it's going to save it, it's going to write it to a file, and then it's going to have a new line every time a new key is pressed. So what we want to do now is we want to actually use that function, and we want to use the listener. So we're going to do with listener, and we're going to use on press. So every time a key is pressed, we're gonna run that function, this function up here called log keystroke. We're going to just name it listener, and then we're going to do listener.join. And what this is going to do, it's going to, the .join, it will keep it running, kind of like a loop, so it never ends until we actually interrupt it. Okay, so now let's save this file, Control S, and we can run it. So if we do Control and then F5 in VSCode, we can see here that it is running this. So what does this mean for us? Okay, so let's just write, we can just do it in here. So any keys we press is going to get logged. We can already see here that a file keylog.txt has been created. So if we look at that, we can see we've pressed the enter key twice. So if we just type anything, and we come to keylog.txt, what we can see here is literally everything, each key has been placed on a new line, and perfect, it works. And that's in less than 10 lines of Python code. We've created a keylogger. Awesome. Just a quick one. If this didn't run, the reason for it was probably because pynput couldn't get installed. And this is because pip install, you can't install packages directly anymore. You have to run it through a virtual environment. And the way to do that, which is what I've done here, is, so if we just stop this, we'll just interrupt it and we'll stop this. So what we need to do, I'll run it in VS Code, but it'll be the same in any terminal. So first down here, what we need to do is, if we do Python 3, so if you can, I've already typed it, so Python 3-m for module, and we run the venv module, which is for virtual environment. and then we just give it a directory and we give it a name. So it's called venv. And if we press enter, we run that. And then what we need to do is we need to source that vn file. So we're going to put in the directory and then /bin activate. And if we run that, you can see we're going to get dropped in the venv directory. Oh, sorry, the venv, like vn, the virtual environment. So we're going to get dropped in that. And once we're in there, we're going to do, now we can do pip install pynput. If we run that, we can see, well, mine's already been satisfied, but that's how you can install pynput or any package that gets run through pip install. If you're in VSCode, however, and you want it to actually work, because even though you've installed it through the virtual environment, how do you actually use that? How do you use that interpreter in VSCode? So the way to do this is if we do Control-Shift-P and then type Python, and then at the top we just select interpreter and then enter interpreter path, and then you're going to enter the path that you saved it as. So for us it was home /mynv /bin Python, and that's what you're going to type in there. You press enter, and that will then, the squiggly lines from here would have disappeared then. Perfect. Okay, let's say we want to spice this up a little bit. This was a basic keylogger, but as you can see, this is run just on the local machine. So if we want to spice this up a little bit and actually have a keylogger that sends those keystrokes back to our machine from a target machine, what we can utilize is something called sockets. And Python has got a sockets module. Sockets are endpoints for sending and receiving data over the network. And you generally have two different, create two different files. So you have a server and you have a client. And the server is the one it's almost like a phone call. The server waits for the call, and the client is the one that actually dials the server and starts and creates that connection. So if we jump in and actually make these two files, we can close these for now. So what we're going to do is we're going to create two files, one called Server.py, and then we're going to create another one called Client.py. So if we go to Server.py first, so what we need to do first is we need to import the socket module, because this is going to be needed for any type of network communication. And then what we're going to do is we're going to provide two constants. So host equals, and we're just going to put in 0, 0, 0, 0. Did I miss any zeros? That's enough zeros. And the next one we need to provide is port. And we're just going to use a random port, so 9999. And this is going to be, so the 0000 is so it listens on all interfaces, and the port is just so it's going to listen on that specific port. Now what we need to do is we need to create a TCP socket. So we're going to use that socket, so with socket.socket, and we're going to do socket.afinet, and this is for IPv4, and then also we need to do socket.sockstream, and this is for TCP. And TCP is just going to guarantee that the data gets delivered in order. And we're going to name it, and we just name it as S, because I'm lazy. And then s.bind, so we're going to bind the host and the port that we just specified. We're going to bind them together, and this is going to reserve that port on our machine so the client knows where to connect to. So host and port is what we're going to input. And then what we need to do is s.listen. It's just going to listen for one incoming connection. And then just to provide some feedback for us, we're going to do, I'm just going to provide an f string listening on port, and we're just going to pass in that port. And then just to make it look cool, I'm just going to do that. And now what we want to do is we want to accept those incoming connections. So the way we do this, we're going to do con and address equals s.accept. So when a client connects, the accept, this accept method will return a new socket object, which is con, and it's also going to return their address, which is the ADDR. So now we're going to use that new socket object. So with con, so we're going to just make it look pretty again. So we're going to put in that f string, and we're just going to say connected by, and this is where we're just going to put in the address, so we can see when someone connects to us where they're connecting from. And now what we want to do is we want to log everything that gets sent to us. So again, we're going to use the with open, and we're just going to call it received keylog. And then what we want to do is we also want to append, because like I said before, we want to write it to a file, we want not overwrite anything, and if the file is not there, we want to create that file. Then we call it as f, and now while that connection is true, we're just going to keep listening and receiving data. So data equals con dot receive, and then we're going to specify how many bytes we want to receive at a time. So we want to receive 1024 bytes, and then if it's not data, we want to break, or we want to break out of that loop, so when the connection is closed. And now all of that data that we receive, we want to write to a file. So we're going to use f.write, but before we write it to a file, we're going to be receiving, so on the Client.py, which we're going to come to, we're going to be writing, we're going to be encoding it into UTF-8 in order to send it over the network. So what we need to do on this side, before we write it, we need to decode it. So data.decode, and we're going to do UTF-8, and what we need to also do is, or what we can do, is if we do f.flush, and what this is going to do, this is going to save that data immediately to the file, so we can see that keylogging in real time. So what we can do now is Control S, and we just save that. And now we can come to, so that's our server.py done. So now we can do the Client.py. So just a note, the Client.py file is the one that's going to be put on the target's machine. I'm just going to write it in here because it's just going to look, it's just a bit nicer to write it in here than to write it in Notepad or something on the other machine. But we'll write it in here, and I've already transferred it over, but we'll just get back to this. So in the Client.py file, the one that's going to get put on the actual target, we need to, like we did with the very first, the basic keylogger, we need to import the listener from the pynput module. So from pynput, oh, I forgot how to spell, okay, luckily it's there. Pynput.keyboard, we're going to import listener. And then we also need to import socket, because it's going to be sent over the network. So here we're going to supply two constants as well. So first is Server.py, which is our attacker IP. So for this it's 192.168.44.129, and then we also want to put in the server port. So what we specified before, which is 9999. So now we want to create a TCP socket, and we want to connect to the attacker server. This is going to be the same as the one we created on the server, but this is going to connect instead of bind. Sorry, it's going to connect instead of listen. So here we're going to create that socket. So sock equals socket dot socket dot socket socket dot afinet for IPv4, and then socket.sockstream. And then this is where we're going to do sock.connect. And we're going to pass in that server IP and the server port. Now, similar to that basic keylogger, we're going to create a function, and we'll just call it the same. So if we do log keylogger, and we're going to pass in a key, and now we're just going to do a try and accept in case something does go wrong. What we want to do is we're going to use sock.send to send the data across, or the keys across. The keys, wherever keys got pressed, we're going to send across. But what we first need to do is we need to convert the keystrokes to bytes and send that, because we can't actually send the string. So we use string, and then we're going to pass in the key, and this is going to make sure it's human readable, and then we're also going to encode it and convert it to byte stream. So I'll show that now. So if we do string, and then we pass in the key, and then we're going to do .encode that, so it comes out. So basically on the server, what we did was we are decoding UTF-8, but here we are obviously sending it as UTF-8 in order for the server to then decode it. And then what we need to do is we just need to close that try accept. So if we do accept, and we'll just do a very basic error handling, which everyone loves. Accept exception as E. Amazing. So we just capture all the exceptions, because why do you need specific ones? And then we'll just do error. We'll just do error sending data, and we'll pass in that exception, so E. Perfect. That's how you do basic error handling. So now we need to actually use that function. So with listener, same as before, with listener on press, and we're going to pass in that log keylogger as listener, we'll just name it listener, and then we'll do listener.join. And then what we need to do at the end is just sock.close. But this is only going to get, to here if we interrupted ourselves. So we'll save that. Okay, cool. So now we've written the client and we've written the server.py files. So what we first need to do is we need to run the server.py file, and then we need to run the client.py file on the target machine. That just threw me off guard. Okay, so on here, so now the first thing we need to do is we need to run this server.py before the client can connect to us. So if we do Control F5, this is going to run. As we can see here, we're listening on port 9999. So if we now come onto the client machine, this is the same as the one we just wrote, the client.py, but instead of writing it in here, just copied it over. So this is exactly the same. And what we're going to do is we're going to run that. So if we do Python, and then we just pass in that client.py, if we run that, and if we come back to our Kali machine, we can now see connected by and the address of that target machine. Back on the Windows machine, if we now type anything, so let's say we just create a new thing in here, and we just type anything, and if we go back to Kali again, if we look at this file that we just received, receive.keylog, we can see that all of the keys we pressed have been logged. Perfect. And that is literally that. So what we did there, we created the server.py, that's listening for incoming connections, and we had the Client.py, which was connecting and sending those keystrokes over the network to the Server.py. And this is just this is quite a fun way to work with and to learn how to work with a sockets module within Python. Like I say, this is not going to make you a hacker, but I mean, I had fun creating this, and I think this is just a great way of just honing those Python skills and just getting better every day. Yeah, that sounded very inspirational.